So he would attach razor blades
Oh,
to the end of the rope. So whenever he hit himself on the back, the razor blades would cut into his skin, and there'd be blood like spattered around the walls.
my God. What does the Pope think about all this?
They've already got today's elite. It's about grooming the next generation of leaders.
That doesn't seem like something Jesus would have said.
They knock on the doors. They find girls who are like 11, 12 years
Oh.
old. Only when they're kind of hundreds of miles away from their families do they perhaps realize what's happening.
This is still happening in 2025. And I'm sure that I'm not the first person to give you this reaction. I thought, okay, what kind of Looney Tune, QAnon, conspiracy theory nonsense is this? Because it actually sounds too insane. And then I obviously, as our conversation continued, I realized, oh, okay, this guy brought receipts. This is not like a weird internet meme conspiracy thing. This is a historical cult that has just not been put in check for like how long? 100 years or
Almost
something?
100 years,
Yeah,
yes.
I can't really. It's shocking. I read the whole book. If I didn't read the book, I still probably wouldn't actually believe you. So hopefully the audience comes along for the ride here, because it is one of those things where it's so ridiculous. You just think, how is this possible? What led you to investigate connections between this secretive group and the United States Supreme Court?
I mean, you're not alone in kind of having that conclusion. I think even people that have been inside Opus Dei are still years later trying to work out what the hell happened to them.
What happened?
Yes, exactly. But I mean, so I fell into this completely by accident. And so I'm a financial reporter by background.
Okay.
And basically what happened was that in 2017, a huge bank in Spain just collapsed overnight, which kind of, in this day and age isn't
It can happen. I was there for the 2008 financial crisis. Banks collapsed. Yeah.
Precisely. And in fact, up until that point, the previous 10 years, I'd spent a lot of time kind of traveling to Sweden, Germany, Russia even, reporting on bank failures and kind of, reporting from the ground, trying to work out what happened. And at first it seemed like the same old story of like, this bank, a bunch of guys, and they were almost all guys, had, taken too many risks, allowed things to get out of control, and kind of were too embarrassed to admit to their mistakes. And so the whole thing kind of crumbled into dust. It seemed like that was the story. And so I and almost everyone else that reported this story wrote that and kind of moved on.
Mm-hmm.
But there was something about the story that kind of seemed a bit odd. For one, most of the shareholders that lost their money tried to get some of their money back. Because, literally their shares went from, I don't know, like 100 euros to zero overnight. And so they were like, what the hell? We want to get some of this back. So they were all suing. There were all these court cases. But the biggest shareholder of all is this kind of group which called itself the Syndicate. It
Not ominous at all. Yeah.
Yes, if you're going to pick a name, then.
Yeah. We want to fly low key, so we're calling ourselves the Syndicate, but you have to say it with a low tone and look over your shoulder before you say it. I mean, that is actually, it's comically ridiculous.
Yes. I mean, and like so many elements of this story, you almost have to pinch yourself and you're like, is this for real? Like,
right. It's like Dr. Evil inventing this. It's just so, if you're trying to run your cult under the radar, you guys are blowing it.
Yes, it's not the way to do it. But so this group seemed to be, whilst everyone else was suing, they seemed to be kind of intent on just kind of quietly disappearing. So that piqued my interest. And so I kind of began to dig, and I basically from there just fell into this rabbit hole, out of which I almost feel like I'm yet to emerge, because every time I feel like I'm kind of crawling out, I'm done with the book or whatever, something else kind of drags me back in. Someone contacts me or whatever, and you're like, oh my goodness, like, yeah.
Is that, what movie is that? Is it it's either the guy, I always get this wrong, and people always email me. It's either Goodfellas or The Godfather, where the guy says, every time I try to get out, they suck me right back in. It's one of those mafia movies. The book does start, so the cult is called Opus Dei, for people who are wondering what that is. Is it OPUSDEI, two words?
Which is Latin for the work of God.
Okay, I was just going to ask. Yeah, so
sorry.
this is, no, perfect. Please do. Because I think the audience is going to either have never heard of them, or some people will go, wait, isn't that from the DaVinci Code? And we'll get into that in a bit. So the book starts with the collapse of this bank. It's Banco Popular, or Banco Popular for us Americans out there. And this is not a small bank that just went under. It's not like they just had a couple locations or they were headquartered in Madrid. This is like I won't say it's the JP Morgan Chase, but it's a massive bank chain, right?
I mean, that's not an exaggeration. I mean, it was one of the top 5 banks in Spain. They had, thousands of branches across the country. It was impossible to walk around a city like Madrid or Barcelona without seeing one of these branches. So, every Spaniard knew this bank, absolutely.
What happened if your money was in the bank when it collapsed,
Okay, so that's so all the shareholders lost all of their money. The bondholders, they kind of lost billions too. The depositors, so the bank was kind of sold overnight in this kind of fire sale.
For parts, basically?
For parts.
Okay.
It was sold for €1 to Banco Santander, which is one of the largest banks in the world.
For €1?
For €1.
Okay, well, fine.
But as part of that deal, they acquired all of the bank's kind of assets and debts. They also acquired, and this is kind of key to the story, and we can get into this later, they also acquired the bank's old archives, which suddenly opened up this whole story to someone like me who came knocking on the door asking to see the receipts.
I'm surprised that they were willing to show you that stuff.
Well, I suspect, I still haven't asked them why, but I suspect they didn't know what they were sitting on. I think it was literally that they'd acquired this warehouse full of papers. And they were like, well, it's probably like really boring stuff.
If you want to waste your time going through that stuff, go right ahead. Don't expect us to supply the coffee.
And I think they were also like, this mess is not ours. So even if he finds something, then it's not,
I mean, and they're right. Yeah, they bought it for €1, and they basically probably saved the depositors who had their funds in there. So they're like, we're the hero of the story. That's not going to change if he finds something that the other thing did. It just makes us look better for having not dropped the ball on all these people's funds. That's true. Did any shareholders? So I assume you're looking for smoking. Where there's smoke, there's fire, right? So were there any shareholders that didn't lose money because they, I don't know, liquidated their shares a couple months prior? Did anybody have a heads up that this was going to happen and bail?
I don't think so. I mean, it was kind of a slow train wreck. These things often are. And so, but the thing is, I mean, the funny thing is actually the Opus Dei foundations that were kind of benefiting from the bank and which were semi-controlling it, they were like, they basically put more and more money into the bank as it started to disintegrate, because for them, it had been their cash cow for so many years. And it had been such a core part of how the cult had kind of grown. It was it was like it was kind of a free money. Well, not free money, but it was the access to huge amounts, a huge pool of money. It was the golden goose for many years. And so I think they were they lost as much as everyone else because they were desperate not to lose control of this thing. And so they just kept putting in money right until the end.
Oh, I see. So how did the bank collapse? Because don't you kind of have to be abusively negligent with funds in order to lose that kind of business?
Yeah, I mean, the bank was massively overexposed to the whole real estate sector in Spain.
I see.
Which, there was kind of, collapsed from post 2008. There was just kind of a very slow collapse.
Never recovered. Okay,
exactly.
I see. So before we get into what you found in those bank records, because I'm going to guess it's not nothing, otherwise we wouldn't be here. Let's do a little bit of background on Opus Dei, the cult, because we don't have to get too in the weeds on the history of the people who started it or whatever, but it sure sounds like it started, like you said, almost 100 years ago, and it kind of just sounded like a labor trafficking organization, for lack of a better word.
Okay, so Opus Dei which, as we said, kind of means the work of God, was dreamed up, I guess you might say, by this Spanish priest called José María Escrivá. So he went on retreat in 1928, and whilst on retreat, he had this, what he called a vision. He said it was directly from God.
Yeah.
For this kind of new organization that would,
these guys never make business plans. They just get downloads directly from God, right? They can't just sit around and make something up yourself.
Well, it's kind of, it's interesting you said that, because it's impossible to know for sure, but my interpretation is, so he'd come from this family that had kind of basically fallen from grace. They were a wealthy family whose business went bankrupt. And so they'd known the good times. They had all these servants, and then suddenly they kind of hit rock bottom.
I see.
The father died. And this guy, José María, as the eldest son, I think he felt this huge weight on his shoulders of like having to kind of bring the family back up to its kind of proper status. And so I think he really was on the hunt for a business idea.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
It sounds like it, and he maybe didn't have the acumen to start a proper business, so he's like, a cult, why not?
Yeah, and he at one stage he trained as a priest, which is it wasn't that abnormal for the oldest son at that stage in Spain. In fact, my partner's uncle, who's the eldest by the man in the family, he also trained as a priest, not Opus Dei.
But didn't join a cult, but
it's
made a hard right at her.
She was also from that part of Spain. And so basically what happened was, so he went on this retreat and he got this vision, and his idea was there was a gap in the market. So if you're a Catholic, you're either kind of an everyday Catholic, you go to Mass every Sunday, you confess whenever you sin or whatever. You're either that, or if you want to go a bit deeper, you become a priest or a nun. And there was nothing in between. And he's like, you know what? There's a little niche here I could carve out for myself.
Right, sure.
And so what he did was he invented this new organization, which was for ordinary Catholics, but allowed them to kind of go deeper into their faith.
So this is like the people. You're not the people who go to the gym 3 times a week. You're not the people who become professional athletes. You're the people who want to go to the gym every single day. Maybe you're running a triathlon. It's like, we need those Catholics. We want the ones who want to, because they have these rituals that are serious, and I want to talk about some of these. But it sounds a bit like, well, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves here. The recruiting process for this sounds a little bit like Scientology, kind of. It's like, hey, you don't need those pesky friends and family that aren't into this as much as you. You got to hang out with us. We're the ones who are really heads down on this. And the love bombing about how great it is and how you're doing, like you said, God's work, or they named the thing God's work, right? And it just starts to spread among, was it students at first? Was that kind of
students initially. Well, I mean, to begin with, he really struggled to get any recruits. I mean, he became so desperate at one stage that he went kind of to sit beside this dying woman to kind of give her the last rites, whatever. And he said to her, you know what, when you get upstairs, when you get to heaven, could you maybe like intercede? Could you maybe kind of send down a miracle for me to help me get some followers? At another stage, he almost quit the priesthood entirely because it just wasn't working out. In the first 5 years, he had something like 8 followers or whatever. He was getting desperate.
Right. But he's like the worst influencer ever. Imagine asking a dead person, like, I just have a quick favor. When you get up there, can you just ask God to do me a solid? It's like, I'm going to be new. I'm going to be the new guy or the new gal. I don't know how much clout I'm going to have.
You know what? Maybe it works because, you know, they have almost 100,000 members these days. So maybe that chat paid off. I'm not sure. But
ask God to give me the blue check mark. That's basically what he's asking for.
So, I mean, but he started to hone his methods, and he very quickly came up with this kind of blueprints for recruitment. And it very quickly became very culty as well. So he talked about how you should never target people as a group. You should try and pick them off one by one. Never go after someone who's older than 25, because his belief was that once you hit 25, you began to ask too many questions. You became kind of set in your ways. And it was hard to...
Your prefrontal cortex is developed and you won't fall into this nonsense anymore.
Absolutely. And also, like, he told the people that he targeted, he told them not to tell their friends or family that they were considering joining. And so, you know, there are all of these real kind of red flags for anyone on the outside.
But maybe cults were kind of not as widespread as they are now.
No,
right?
I mean, in some ways he was ahead of his time. I mean, in some ways I've got to take my hat off to him and be like, wow, I mean, this is way before Hubbard and Scientology and the rest of it.
And to be fair, the last cult that really took off was Christianity at that point, right? I mean, I know that's going to ruffle some feathers, but look, we're talking about the year 0. It's kind of a new thing. It was by all definitions sort of a cult. It was just maybe a little bit less creepy than Opus Dei or Scientology.
And so once he got these guys in, they were generally expected to live in an Opus Dei residence so that, you know, they could be watched and controlled 24 hours a day. And then they were given this thing that they call in Opus Dei, they call the plan of life, which is basically a schedule of prayer, mortification, and all kinds of other requirements.
Okay, so what's mortification? Because this is just one of the weird practices of the members. And I think people who've seen is it the DaVinci Code movie?
Yes.
They show a little bit of that there, and it's decidedly creepy.
Yes, and I mean, there are lots of things about the DaVinci Code which are completely fictionalized.
You
nonsense.
Don't say. Okay, so it's not a historically accurate movie. Darn.
That's
Thanks for coming in. Yeah,
but some elements are true, and so the corporal mortification. Okay, what is that? I mean, it basically means hurting yourself, punishing your body, as a way of and corporal mortification is something that Christians have done for hundreds of years, but has kind of fallen out of practice.
Is this so mortification? Mortified now means embarrassed, but I suppose before it means like some sort of degradation, essentially.
Yeah,
Is this like carrying the heavy wooden cross on your back, kind of
absolutely.
thing? Okay.
It's feeling, it's bringing yourself closer to Christ by kind of feeling the pain, I guess, that he felt on the cross. And yeah, people do that in various different ways. The two ways in Opus Dei, there are two kind of primary methods. There are other smaller things, but the two main ones, they have these two devices. One is called the cilis, which is kind of like a barbed wire that you wear around a part of your body, normally the thigh. So you attach it to the thigh, and these kind of claws dig into your thigh. You wear it for like 2 hours a day
It's like a
or
dog
longer.
collar, one of those pinchy dog collars,
It's more like it's kind of like a chain. It's kind of like it's a wire
like a spiky
chain
barbed wire chain.
with these spikes that kind of go onto the inside. So whenever you sit down, you wear this under your trousers or whatever.
Oh, under your pants. Okay.
Whenever you sit down, it digs into your leg.
Why would you sit down?
Well, why would you do anything?
Yeah, why would you put that thing on in the first place? They're asking the real questions.
But you can wear it around other parts of your body. So, for example, the founder of Opus Dei, this guy called Escrivá, he was kind of obsessed with his weight, and so he wore this thing around his waist. I think, possibly as punishment also for his kind of gluttonous habits. So one thing is a cilis, this kind of chain. The other thing is called a discipline, which is basically a whip. So it's this. Normally, it's a rope. Kind of, there are maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 strands, and you take off your shirt. Sometimes you take off your pants as well, and you whip yourself over your shoulder. And the founder of Opus Dei took this to a whole new level. So he would attach razor blades to the end of the rope. So whenever he hit himself on the back, the razor blades would cut into his skin.
Yeah.
And, his followers would write about, going to the room after he'd been doing this, and there'd be blood like spattered around the walls.
Oh my gosh,
It's
yes.
pretty...
That's gnarly. It started out like something they do at Pride Parade in San Francisco and ended up like a Japanese horror movie. That's really gross, man.
it is really gross. And
Jeez.
these practices go on today as well.
So people are still whipping themselves with the cat of 5 tails or whatever this guy had.
Absolutely. People are still doing
wow.
this. In fact, if you're there are different kinds of members of Opus Dei, but if you're kind of one of the elite members, these so-called numeries, you're expected to wear the cilis for 2 hours every single day without fail, and you're meant to do the discipline once a week on Saturdays. So yeah, it's kind of all part of the plan of life.
You can't pick your own flogging methods, I guess?
Life is so prescribed. So, you get up at a certain time every day. The first thing you do is you get out of bed. You're not allowed to kind of dawdle for even a second. You offer up it's called the heroic minute. You get out of bed, you kiss the floor, and the first word you say is serviam, which means I serve God.
Okay, so you're like a robot at this point.
You're kind of like a robot. And then you have a whole day of like mass. You say like 15 different prayers. You've got these corporal mortification things to do. And you're also meant to go out to work and recruit people as well.
Wow. So they're super pious, but somehow they're also thieves that ended up bankrupting a bank somehow. Is that a fair assessment at all?
Well, there's this whole culture inside of Opus Dei, which is that you should do whatever's necessary to basically expand the movement and to. So Escrivá he saw his followers as part of this kind of hidden militia that would infiltrate society and use their positions there to basically push society in the right direction.
That's extra creepy, right? That's the part where it's like you go from, hey, let people do what they want if they're going to be religious fanatics. We have religious freedom in this country. Let them do what they want. They're not hurting anybody but themselves. And then it's like, oh, actually, they're seeking to control. It's ironic because I'm guessing these are the same people that spread conspiracies about Jews controlling the world. And they're like, no, really, though, we're trying to do that.
Well, you know what? Escrivá was something of a conspiracy theorist himself.
I see.
So, and there was quite a big evolution. So initially when it started out, the group was in the kind of late 20s, early 30s. Like I said before, it was basically this kind of elite organization to help Catholics just to kind of go a bit deeper.
Mm-hmm.
But you've got to, the backdrop here is super important because, so this is Spain, early 1930s, a country on the brink of civil war. Like the workers have literally risen up, overthrown the monarchy, and they're beginning to turn their backs on things like the church. So the church, for centuries had controlled large parts of society, not least education. And so people would like, what the hell? We don't want this. And so
you said Civil War. Sorry to interrupt. This is Civil War. So that's like the communists versus, or am I too early for that?
I mean, there were some communist elements, but it was kind of more generally, it was kind of a coalition of the left. Literally the workers rose up and were like, we were sick of the old order. So they kicked out the monarchy.
I see.
And the socialists and a coalition took over, and they started to unpick the church's kind of dominance over society. They secularized education, this kind of stuff. Things which are quite common these days. Right. So Escrivá sees what's happening around him, and he's absolutely horrified. And so he begins to transform this group that he's begun to grow. And his writings become really quite aggressive. He thinks there's a massive conspiracy going on. He thinks the Jews, the communists, and the Masons are teaming up to overthrow Christianity.
Right. Meanwhile, the Jews are just like, leave us alone. Yeah, come on.
No, and so he kind of rethinks the whole idea of Opus Dei, and he turns it into basically a kind of a political organization. He sees his followers as this kind of militia, and he literally tasks them with infiltrating government, business, the world of education, becoming journalists, and kind of using their positions there to, I guess, kind of be this kind of guerrilla reactionary force that will kind of fight back against these conspiracy.
But is it domestic only at this time, or are they trying to Christianize the whole planet?
Well, he sees what's happening in Spain as part of this global battle to kind of reinstate. He calls it the re-Christianization of the world.
Yeah, I'm guessing that kind of thing doesn't happen peacefully.
Yes. Well, no, he talks about people fighting, and he very much sees it as a battle between his followers and what he calls the enemies of Christ. Anyone that isn't part of Opus Dei is an enemy of Christ. And so yes, but this stage it's just in Spain, but in the 1940s it begins to go international.
So what does the Pope think about all this at this point? Because is this like, oh, okay, those are the hardcore Catholics, or are they secret and the Pope doesn't know about it?
No, so they at first they kind of they're not really on the Vatican's radar, but and kind of Escrivá is expanding the organization diocese by diocese. So he goes into each diocese, which is kind of for non-Catholics, or it's just kind of a local area kind of thing. Yeah,
like a county, but for Catholics.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, and he goes to the bishop in charge there and says, "Hey, would you mind if we set up a residence and we kind of, we're doing good work here, whatever." But some bishops are kind of a bit suspicious, so he decides at some stage, you know what, I need authorization from the Vatican itself, because then we can go anywhere and we don't have to ask permission. And he goes, and in, I think it's 46, he gets permission from the Vatican to do his work wherever. And that kind of opens up the horizons, and very quickly they start to expand to Portugal, across Europe, and even to the States.
So who's leading Spain at this time? Is this already the time of Franco? Is he like a military dictator? Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. And Escrivá, this supposedly deeply Christian guy, has absolutely no qualms about cozying up to this brutal dictator.
Well, to be fair, that was de rigueur for wasn't the Vatican sort of turning a blind eye to the Holocaust during this period of time as well? It's not like the highest moral standing the Catholic Church has ever had.
But actually, the victory of Franco in the Civil War is like a critical moment for the group. Before the war, he was, he had all these grand ideas, but he really struggled to recruit. He comes back into Madrid in, I think it's March 39. He literally rides into Madrid on the back of this military truck alongside all these Francoist troops. And he arrives in this city that's been absolutely decimated. Hunger is everywhere. You've got kids kind of like hunting through garbage piles for potato skins. They want something to eat. Women are selling their bodies because it's the only way to get money, get some food. You've got all of these diseases that have not been seen since the medieval times kind of coming back. So he as a good kind of Catholic Christian priest, he arrives back and sees all this. And what does he do? Does he go out and help the people? No. He sets about making money and expanding his business, or this thing he calls a family business. And very quickly he starts cozying up to the regime, offering Opus Dei services. He offers to make Opus Dei into like he basically offers to kind of go into to team up with the regime, and he offers Opus Dei as a service to basically kind of, I guess, hunt out any kind of subversive groups out there in factories and on the farms, and to kind of help to kind of, to damp down any kind of political kind of uprisings or whatever. He also sets up all of these residences, and Franco, like, for people that don't know much about the Franco years, he was an absolutely brutal dictator. Like, even after the war, obviously, both sides committed atrocities during the war. But during peacetime, he, after the ceasefire, he murdered tens of thousands of his political opponents. He pushed like hundreds of thousands of people into concentration camps. He was sending left-wing people to the Nazis to be experimented on.
Oh, wow.
And meanwhile, Escrivá, the founder of Opus Dei, is offering Opus Dei services to help this guy. Escrivá's hosting private retreats for Franco and his wife at the palace outside of Madrid. It's incredible just how much of a blind eye he turned, yeah.
So Franco's like a minor Hitler-esque character in a way.
Yeah, and he actually he really tried to cozy up to Hitler and offered him all kinds of things to help him. Hitler, I think, very much looked down his nose.
Time for this.
Yes.
Jeez. My gosh. These are some despicable characters so far. So the new members of this cult, I assume eventually these students who are in Opus Dei, they start to form companies and come of age and are they getting the jobs to have influence, and are they being placed now that they've sort of won the Civil War and they're on the good side, or they're on Franco's good side, they're able to, I don't know, work in the government or something like that?
Yeah, no, totally. So what happens is that so Escrivá's got this vision of, his members need to infiltrate the kind of upper echelons of society in order to shape society. And so, he's recruiting very much people from the elite, people from good families, people from money, people who've got great prospects. Tomorrow's leaders. He's recruiting them at university. And so, like, 5-10 years after recruiting them, many of these people are really kind of climbing up the ladder. By the 50s, a number of ministers in the kind of national government are members of Opus Dei. And, the Opus Dei network runs far and wide. Opus Dei itself has several businesses, but also many of its members are kind of deeply embedded into, and they kind of it's a really corrupt society as well. And so it's all through connection. So the closeness of Opus Dei to the regime means that a lot of its members and Opus Dei itself gets lots of favors. So they get like export deals, they get the nod to like open up this new business. And so it becomes very beneficial financially as well.
So it's a revenue generating enterprise at this point. It's not just get the rich kids and they'll get their parents to send us money. Now we've got special sweetheart deals with the government because we're cozying up to the dictator.
Absolutely.
That's another sort of left turn into making this a little bit more evil, right? So it's like, okay, if you want to whip yourself, we don't love it, but okay. And then it's like, no, we're trying to take over the world, and we're going to do that by cozying up to this really crappy regime. And so they're slowly getting more and more evil, kind of, from the sound of it.
And slowly getting bigger and bigger. I mean, by the 50s, they were present in, I don't know, like something like 20 countries, including the States. They've expanded to Latin America, across Europe, and they have thousands of members. And, as this thing grows, it becomes, the speed of expansion becomes greater because they've got more and more resources, and so they can open more residences, more schools, and whatever. And so the recruitment method becomes much more kind of efficient, I guess.
At what point do they go, "Hey, we need a bank"? How does that come about?
So, I mean, by the early 50s, they had already had a pretty big network of companies in Spain. So they had, and like random stuff. So they had bookshops and publishers. They had like a film distribution company. So like, they were the equivalent of like, I don't know, of minting kind of VHS cassettes kind of things.
Sure.
Back in, it's kind of, but these were ways to make money. But I think they very quickly realized that there was a limit to how much this network of businesses could generate. And by getting the kind of hands on a bank, that would take them to a very different level. Because suddenly you've got, having access to a bank gives you access to this massive pool of savings that all the depositors have put in there. Like, these days, like banks have balance sheets in the trillions of dollars. Of course, we're not talking that level of money back then in the 1950s, and certainly not in Spain. But the kind of, it took you from here to the ceiling.
Sure.
And so the way they got into the bank as well is kind of extraordinary. So I think it was the chief executive of the bank or the vice chairman or something. He found out about some dodgy deal that the chairman had done. And he, as a good Catholic, was like, it was really eating at me. I need to share this with someone. He was friends with someone from Opus Dei. And so he decides to basically open up his heart to this Opus Dei guy, thinking that the Opus Dei guy is, as another good Christian, he's going to just, give him some kind of confidential advice and kind of pat him on the back, tell him, the moral thing to do. Instead, the Opus Dei goes back and informs all of his colleagues back at the center, and they come up with a plan to use this bit of information to oust the chairman and take control of the bank themselves.
So it's like an intelligence network instead of a confession booth.
Yeah, and they hijacked this bank, and that, that's alongside the victory of Franco, this is the other critical moment in Opus Dei's history where, they suddenly take this turn and the sky's the limit.
I know at some point it becomes about bringing in poor people from other countries or other parts of the country and kind of using them to serve the members. I mean, this is also sort of very... I hate to use the same example over and over. It's very Scientology, right? They do those audits on you where you have to confess things and then they use it against you later. Yeah. And they bring in kids from the Midwest and they basically say, oh, you're going to go to Hollywood and hang out with Tom Cruise. But all you have to do is work for free full time in our museum or whatever. I mean, it's very much a similar recipe from the sound of it. Honestly, I was going to say except for the religious thing, but Scientology has that too.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the slightly more ominous thing not slightly, the thing that makes this so much worse is that this is an organization which has been legitimized by the Catholic Church. It's an official part of the Catholic Church. It has the stamp of approval from the Pope, from the Vatican. And so, with Scientology, people are like, just a minute, this is just some crazy bunch of people. It's some, and wait, aliens? What are you talking about?
Right.
But with Opus Dei, people, I think, when they're first introduced to Opus Dei, especially until recently, when there wasn't much information about it, they just assume, well, this is a bunch of devout Catholic guys who just want to, they must be good because they have the seal, stamp of approval. But so yes, I mean, so they use that to recruit, and so what they need, and I guess this is what you were alluding to, is they need workers because they need people to go out there and to find targets, to groom them, and to kind of pounce to get them into the group. And so they have this kind of elite army, I would call them, of people called numeries. These are people who've taken, they're not quite vows, but they've basically promised their lives to Opus Dei. They make these pledges. So they take these pledges of poverty, which means that they give all of their money to Opus Dei. They take a pledge of chastity, which means that basically they're married to Opus Dei. And they also, which I guess is related to that, they take a pledge of obedience. So whatever Opus Dei requires of them, they do it. So this is the kind of core group, the numeries, and they live in special gender-segregated Opus Dei residences. They have a director watching over them who tells them kind of what to do, who to target, and they're constantly under pressure to go out there and find recruits. So you have those guys, the key workers. But at one stage in the 40s, the founder kind of realized that I guess they were spending a lot of money on domestic servants at the residences. So they had all of these women who coming in to cook and clean for the men, and numeries can be men and women, but they always had these kind of servant girls who would come in. And he came up with this idea of, why don't we open up membership to these servants? But they weren't allowed to join on the same terms as the other numeries. So he kind of invented this new class, this underclass of membership called the numery servants. And they were all women. That this is not a class opened up to men. And you would basically you would join as a servant, and in a way it became a source of free labor for Opus Dei, because these, once these servants became members, they were expected to hand over their paychecks back to Opus Dei. So Opus Dei was paying them and then saying, just a minute, you need to give that back to us. And at one stage, just didn't bother paying them, because why bother? And so, and Escrivá, he kind of said that the kind of creation of this new subclass was the greatest gift that God had ever given to Opus Dei. This goes on today, and maybe we can get onto this later. But very recently there's been soon there's going to be a trial in Argentina where Opus Dei's been formally accused of human trafficking.
Yeah, that's what this is. It's slavery. It's not a gift from God. You're just enslaving people.
Absolutely, absolutely. And these kids, Opus Dei to this day operates this network of what it calls hospitality schools around the world.
Oh, there's a euphemism.
There's absolutely a euphemism. And what they do is they go around to poor communities, they knock on the doors, they find young girls, they find girls who are like 11, 12 years old.
Oh, geez, like actually very young girls.
Yes. They're kids. Okay. They find kids. And they say to the kids and their parents, hey, like around here, there are no prospects for your girl, but if you send her back to the big city with us, over in Lagos or over in Buenos Aires or over in Mexico City, we run this amazing school where we teach the girls how to cook and clean, and they work towards a qualification. It's a way to a better life for them. And so the girls and the parents, they're like, these guys are from the Catholic Church. And
how bad can it be?
How bad can it be?
Right.
Well, yes. We can. Right. But, and the girls, only when they're kind of hundreds of miles away from their families, do they perhaps realize what's happening, and they are manipulated, coerced, pushed into joining Opus Dei as these numeri servants. And yes, I mean, it's a huge scandal, and it's happening all over the world, across Latin America and Nigeria, the Philippines.
And to be clear, this is not 1950 where this is happening. This is still happening in 2025, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So there's this trial that's about to happen in Argentina. Some women have recently come forward in Mexico, but I know for a fact because the bank in Spain was financing the creation of all of these schools.
Sure, yeah.
So in the archives, I found all kinds of documents which, basically there's a whole network of these schools financed by the bank, and I don't know exactly how many, but we're talking dozens, if not 100, of these different schools around the world.
That's a great segue into what else you found in those bank archives, because it just seems to me if they're doing something so awful, they would have tried to get rid of the records. But then I think, okay, the Germans in the Holocaust, they used IBM machines and they tracked everything, and they burned some stuff, but there was just too much to get rid of. Is that the same kind of situation we're dealing with here?
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, the collapse of the bank, whilst terrible for all of the investors, was great for me. Because,
it worked out well for you, yeah.
Because nobody would have ever been given access to those records. They never expected in their wildest dreams that the bank would collapse.
Sure.
And then someone like me would come around sniffing around, kind of trying to piece things together.
Pesky journalists.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think there was just, maybe it was a similar thing with the Nazis. They just didn't think they were ever going to get caught.
They didn't think they were going to lose. They didn't think they were going to have any accountability, right? If you own a bank, it's like, oh, you can keep track of this. It's our bank. No one's going to look at here.
And also, a lot of these guys, the founder of Opus Dei had this kind of, these kind of phrases where he talked about things like holy ruthlessness and holy intransigence, which basically the message is anything goes. If you're doing what God wants, then it's kind of okay to cut a few corners or to do a few wrong things. He actually told one of his followers, actually the guy that was leading the bank, he said, when you look around and you see people doing bad things, kind of don't worry too much, because you're probably going to see these guys again in heaven. It's kind of fine. God will kind of look the other way for certain things. So,
I'm not a religious scholar, but I feel like the religious teachings of Jesus, etc., were not like, you can just do whatever you want because God's on our side. It's cool. We're just going to look the other way. And, by any means necessary. That doesn't seem like something Jesus would have said. All right, a quick break. I'm going to tell you about something that'll actually make your life a little bit easier. I regularly take shots of Ketone IQ plus caffeine from HVMN. It is 5 grams of ketones 100 milligrams of caffeine from green tea. So no sugar, no crash, just clean, focused energy. Now, ketones are molecules that your body naturally produces during fasting, intense exercise, or a low-carb, high-fat diet, so aka ketosis. And when glucose, carbs, aren't readily available, your liver breaks down fat into ketones, which then become an alternative fuel source for your brain and muscles. And our body likes using ketones because they're a high-efficiency fuel, especially for the brain and the muscles. Ketone IQ from HVMN skips that whole process, gives you pure, drinkable ketones, so you get the benefits of ketone energy without having to fast for days on end or go full keto. I take it before I hit the gym. It gives me that steady, locked-in energy without making me feel like I'm kind of vibrating a little bit. And I also take it before I need to do a show. Same deal. I feel focused, same steady energy. And it's not just me. Team Visma, Lisa Bike, literally the best pro cycling team in the world. They use Ketone IQ to fuel their races. These guys won the Tour de France twice, dominated all 3 Grand Tours last year. Olympians, Ironman champions, they're all on this stuff because it works. So if you want to try it, go to ketone.com/Jordan. You'll get 30% off your first subscription order and a free 6-pack of Ketone IQ. That's these little things right here. Get energy that actually works. Ketone.com/Jordan. Links in the description. If you're thinking about starting a business or you already have one and maybe logo or branding design is not your strong suit, you're going to love Design.com. With Design.com, creating a standout logo is as easy as it gets. You just pop in your business name and your industry, and in seconds, you're going to get thousands of custom logos to choose from. Every design is handcrafted by top designers and exclusive to Design.com, so you're getting something unique. Once you find a design that you like, you can customize the fonts, the colors, the layouts to make it yours. Then you download all those assets and you're good to go. And Design.com doesn't just stop at logos. They've got tools to help you create all of your branding materials, from website to social media posts to business cards, all perfectly aligned with your brand. If you already have a logo, you can upload it and you get instant access to thousands of design templates that actually match your brand's look and your color scheme. So this tool saves you a lot of time. It lets you focus on growing your business instead of getting stuck in the weeds with marketing materials. With a 4.8-star Trustpilot rating, Design.com is legit amazing. It's run by a friend of mine. The company's been around for a while. They really do care about their customers. Try it for free at design.com/Jordan. That's design.com/Jordan.
And also, like, Catholicism has this kind of unique kind of get out of jail free card as well. If you confess and you repent, it's all fine, right?
I mean, this is coming to you from the people who were like, hey, your relative is in the 7th circle of hell, and if you want to get them up a few notches, just give us a bunch of money. I mean, This is not like a brand. The corruption in this particular organization is not brand new.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Jeez. Oh my goodness.
But yeah, I mean, like, so because they didn't think they were ever going to get caught. I mean, this kind of stuff I found. I mean, there was one incident where one of the bank's employees, an Opus Dei member, had been sent to Venezuela with a suitcase full of money. And we don't know exactly what it was for, but it was probably to start up a new Opus Dei school there. Anyway, he got arrested, and because actually the Venezuelan police thought he was a communist, and they arrested him, and it caused this big kind of diplomatic incident.
This is before they loved communists in Venezuela, I assume.
This this is in the 60s actually, when Venezuela was like kind of oil boom kind of.
Got it. Yeah.
And the this guy gets caught. There's this whole diplomatic incident, and these negotiations. He gets sent back to Spain, and when he comes back to Spain, he's collected at the airport by a bunch of Opus Dei minders, who then put him into this mental asylum because they're worried that he's kind of going to crack and he's going to tell everyone what he was really up to and where the money came from and all this stuff. And then he basically disappears. Now, this whole story is kind of documented in the bank's archives. Wow. And, you know, like so many times in researching the book, you kind of come across something and you're like, what? Like, you almost can't believe what you're reading.
Yeah.
But it's there in black and white. You back it up with other evidence, and you kind of almost have to pinch yourself. There's some incredible stories like that in the book.
So, there are quite a few stories like that in the book as well. It seems like the group Opus Dei begins to ask Catholics to essentially exert their influence in professional and political spheres. There's a Supreme Court justice in the United States that's in this cult, correct?
Well,
allegedly or something?
We don't know because membership of Opus Dei is completely private.
Okay.
But we do know that in the early 2000s, well, maybe your listeners will have heard of this thing called the Federalist Society.
Yeah, we had a branch in my law school.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
And how was that?
I just remember they were conservative, and a couple of my friends were in it, and they're like, you should join. It's right up your alley. But I don't really know much else. I'm not sure.
So I mean, one of the most powerful guys inside the Federalist Society is a guy called Leonard Leo, who is a huge fan of Opus Dei. He's given a huge amount of money to Opus Dei. He sent his kids to the Opus Dei schools in Washington D.C. He sits on the board of directors at the Opus Dei Center in Central Washington, and he has been, I guess, the person who's probably single-handedly most responsible for the kind of shift of the Supreme Court over the past 10 years or whatever. And in the early 2000s, there was this incident at a party, this only came out recently. I think Chief Justice Roberts had either just been appointed to the court or was about to be appointed. And this big boss from the Federalist Society said, don't worry, he attends Opus Dei evenings of recollection kind of once a week. He's one of us. You don't need to worry about him. So, I mean, whether or not that means he's a member or not, I'm not sure. But certainly it's, yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's really kind of scary.
Yes.
Can you provide any sort of overview of methods or tactics that the groups use to influence political or maybe judicial decisions in any way?
Yeah. I I was talking kind of recently to a numeri from Spain. So these kind of elites who are. So what happens once they've found people to recruit? The way that Opus Dei operates is that it, of course, you're expected to kind of whip yourself and do the rest of it and go to mass and confession and but they also have this additional requirement, which is called the chat. It's kind of sounds nice and friendly, right?
Whenever it sounds that innocent, it's always horrific, right?
And this thing is like, it's meant to be done every week or every 2 weeks. And basically a numeri comes out to you and sits with you, and you open up your heart and you tell them everything about your life, your sex life, your professional life, whatever.
That's incredibly awkward to think about.
And they give you guidance. This celibate guy that you don't really know, kind of giving you guidance about your sex life.
A 40-year older than me celibate man is going to tell me what to do with my sex life. Sounds great.
I'm pretty sure that the kind of sex life advice is always the same, which is like, you only have sex to procreate and you should be having as many kids as possible. So I mean, that's basically all of the advice they need to give, I think.
I'm starting to think I'm not a good fit for Opus Dei, Gareth.
But these chats kind of over the years have been used to kind of collect information and have been used also to kind of to abuse the kind of relationship, the confidence that the member puts into Opus Dei. So they're often used to. So, for example, I mean, one of the guys I was talking to recently, a guy from Mexico, was telling me about every time he got back to the center after doing one of these chats, he had to put together this report card. Now, because they didn't want to have a paper trail, the report card, and this was even in the 2000s, was put together on a typewriter with kind of a carbon copy underneath. So you're typing out all of these intimate details about this guy you've just sat with, about, I don't know, like trouble he's having at work or like marital problems. You're typing it all up into a record. One copy gets kept at the center, put into a safe there or whatever, and the other copy gets sent to the regional headquarters of Opus Dei. So for years, they literally had all of these files, with kind of compromising information on, and they would read this and kind of work out, I guess, ways of using this information to further their agenda. I mean, okay, I should at this stage kind of disavow people of the notion that there's some guy sat in Rome, the head of Opus Dei, issuing orders down to like Leonard Leo or whatever. That's not the way it works.
U.S. Supreme Court.
But yes, that's not the way it works. The way it works is that, they use these chat sessions to kind of gently push people into the right direction. And, often that kind of oversteps the mark. So they might be told about how to think about a certain political issue, and kind of they misuse Catholic teachings to push them in a certain direction. I've heard stories about senior judges as well, members of Opus Dei, being given certain books and articles to read on cases that they're currently kind of sitting on as a way of like pushing them to make the right decision on certain things.
Wow.
So, so these chats, which are supposedly just meant to be like almost like a therapy session, helping you to be a better Catholic, Opus Dei is collecting information and then kind of using that information to work out what buttons it can press to maybe get you to give some more money or to team up with some other members of Opus Dei to, further this anti-abortion group or agenda or
That's what
whatever it might be.
I was going to ask about that because, of course, the abortion cases, Roe v. Wade in the United States, it's front and center, has been for a while, and you get these justices on there, and it's like, well, okay, if your whole mantra is by any means necessary and God's okay with our plan and it isn't subject to the laws of man, how do we know you're making impartial judgments with respect to something like Roe v. Wade? And the answer is you're almost certainly not doing that. So, and you're being nudged to do what the church wants, which is completely inappropriate.
And actually not just what the church wants, because, I mean, the kind of Catholicism that Opus Dei has been pushing has been not the same as what Pope Francis was pushing during his papacy. And I mean, it's too early to talk about Pope Leo, but but like, these are not kind of accepted Catholic teachings, and this is not what the Vatican is pushing. This is a very perverted reading of Catholicism. It's a very conservative, reactionary reading of Catholicism, where they, they kind of pick bits of the Bible to support what is really a kind of ultra-conservative agenda. And, it's using scripture to kind of push back on anything progressive and for anything kind of left-leaning. And it's a misuse of religion, really.
Yeah. So is it safe to say that these people are more conservative than the Pope? Because that's kind of a bold statement.
I mean, certainly more conservative than the current Pope and the last Pope. Whether they were more conservative than John Paul II, who was pretty conservative, and Benedict, I'm not sure. I mean, actually, John Paul II saw Opus Dei as a great ally.
Yeah.
He gave them this kind of special status, which effectively allowed them to operate outside of the normal hierarchy of the church. He saw them as like his kind of his special army.
I was going to say, it's like
Yes.
Catholic special forces.
Precisely. I mean, so when he became Pope in the late 70s, the church, I mean, as it is today, was kind of deeply divided. I think he didn't really know how Rome worked properly. He was worried about kind of bishops in, far-flung places like the States and Latin America who were maybe left-leaning and who weren't listening to his edicts. And so I think he literally gave Opus Dei this special status because he wanted them to be his special forces. He would dispatch them to certain countries that were causing trouble and say, go do your thing.
Wow.
And so he would basically kind of, I guess, subvert and undercut the existing kind of church structure in those countries in order to kind of push his conservative agenda.
Yeah,
Opus Dei were very happy to do that.
Sure, of course. Do you think it's going to? I'm sure it's really hard for you to say, but if they got special status under that previous pope, do you think there's a world in which the current pope is like, hey, by the way, this is ridiculous and a perversion of the religion. We should probably reel these guys in?
Well, I mean, that already started to happen under Francis. So, I mean, Opus Dei has been riddled with accusations of abuse for decades.
Labor trafficking, what else?
Labor trafficking, I mean, grooming of children. It's kind of...
Well, that's on brand.
I mean, drugging, the ranks, the numeri ranks, because of all the pressures on them,
Mm-hmm.
Those ranks are absolutely riddled with mental illness. And what Opus Dei does is it covers that up by heavy use of prescription drugs. So they have these Opus Dei doctors which prescribe drugs for, a numeri who's having a hard time is sent to the Opus Dei doctor, comes back with this kind of long prescription of drugs they're meant to take. Many of them, I've spoken to people who've come out the other side. They leave Opus Dei and they go and see a proper doctor. And the doctor is like, why the hell are you on this long list of drugs? This is doing nothing for you and is making you worse. So, yeah, there's kind of drug abuse, all kinds of kind of financial fraud and kind of spiritual fraud as well that we're talking about before with the chats. So in the late 2010s, Pope Francis became aware of some pretty horrendous abuses inside of Opus Dei, and he decided to take action. And in 2022, the Pope issued this thing called a motu proprio, which is basically a papal decree. It's like, this is an order coming from the Pope. He removed a bunch of the status, and he basically ordered them to get their act in order. He said, like, you guys, you now have to rip up your statutes and start again. You've got to kind of basically redraw your constitution because it's fucked up. And so he maybe didn't use those words. But,
Yeah, he might
he
not.
spoke in Spanish, of course. So
Right.
it's
Right.
but
Sounds nicer in Spanish.
but he basically put them on notice, say you guys need to clean up. So since 2022, Opus Dei has basically dragged its feet. Now, what's interesting about current events is that just before he died on Easter Monday, Pope Francis had been on the cusp of signing into law this huge reform of Opus Dei. So Opus Dei were due to, so it'd all been kind of agreed with the Vatican. A week later, Opus Dei was meant to have this big vote to approve it internally, and then it would get sent back to the Pope. He'd sign it off, and the reforms would be done. So within hours of the Pope dying, Opus Dei cancelled the vote. They're like, maybe we don't have to do this anymore.
Right.
But what's interesting, and actually then there was this huge campaign started to kind of lobby for who was going to be the next
I was going to
Pope.
say, what if they probably, if their enemy is no longer in power, maybe they can get their own guy in there.
Well, there was this extraordinary situation as well where, for a time, Pope Francis's body was kind of lying in state in St. Peter's Cathedral, and people were kind of, members of the public and the cardinals were all kind of lining up to pay their respects. This one Opus Dei cardinal turns up and is photographed standing over the Pope's dead body wearing his cardinal robes. Now, what's interesting about that is that a couple of years earlier, Pope Francis had banned this guy because of all of these sexual abuse allegations. He'd banned him from wearing his cardinal robes and banned him from making any public statements. So within hours of his death, this guy's standing over
like, I win.
I mean, it's a show
That's
of force.
Crazy.
And he then starts to use his time in Rome. He's lobbying alongside a bunch of other kind of conservative forces within the church for a hardline conservative pope. They didn't get what they wanted.
That was my next question. Is
Yes.
Pope Leo a hardline conservative or not?
I mean, and the dirty tricks. I mean, like we've all seen the film Conclave.
Sure.
And I'm sure many of us came away from that thinking, surely it can't be like this. This is just like fiction. Sometimes truth is just stranger than fiction. I mean, like the amounts of like the dirty tricks that were at play in the past few weeks trying to like get the right pope elected and stuff is incredible. And Opus Dei links to some of those maneuverings was incredible too. But with Pope Leo, they clearly didn't get what they wanted. And what's interesting is that Pope Leo, one of his very first acts, one of his very first audiences, he summoned the head of Opus Dei to come and see him and basically demanded an update about where the reforms were.
Where are we at with that thing we were supposed to sign on Friday?
Yeah, you remember that thing?
What thing? I don't remember. Oh, really? Let me refresh your memory. This is interesting.
I mean, for me, that's a very clear signal that this Pope...
sounds like it's a priority.
Yes, I think
day
it's
one, first
very
thing,
much. I mean, literally,
papal executive order, basically.
Absolutely, literally
Wow.
day one, his first set of meetings, Opus Dei guy is brought in. And
Where are we
has
with
to
cleaning
explain,
up the mess
yes.
that you've been making for the last century?
And there are signals coming from the Vatican. I've been hearing from sources that the messages to victims, you aren't going to be disappointed. There's going to be some big reforms coming out. So, I mean, we will see.
Wow.
Yeah, it's all a bit up in the air.
Are there any specific cases, let's say in the United States under the Supreme Court, that you believe were influenced by Opus Dei, besides Roe v. Wade, besides the abortion stuff?
I mean, I think the way to think about it is, okay, so Opus Dei, it's not just the Supreme Court. Like, Opus Dei has spent years inserting itself into the very fabric of Washington, D.C., into the conservative circles. And so, yeah, a bunch of people will be members of Opus Dei, but I think the best way to think about Opus Dei is as a network. Some people will be members. Other people just have kind of brushes with members or with the network. And so it's about creating a culture. It's about kind of informing that culture and creating kind of an ecosystem of, I guess, people like us, so that when Trump's looking to appoint the right person to head up, I don't know, the Department of Education or whatever it might be, there are a bunch of kind of candidates here who are well-versed in Catholic teachings or in kind of conservative Catholic teachings who can be relied on to kind of, push through the right kinds of policies and rulings.
Wow. what are the this is probably a silly question following off the back of that, but what are the implications of this for the future of, let's say, democracy and judicial independence, especially in the United States? Because if there's all these people sort of waiting in the wings and the rest of the folks are highly suggesting that they be appointed to specific positions, I mean, that's sort of the whole Illuminati, the Jews control the world conspiracy that they've been projecting onto Jews, but it's, actually happening with them.
Yeah, I mean, there was actually this one priest in DC, quite a famous Opus Dei priest called C.J. McCloskey, and he he didn't mince his words. I mean, he talked about this great battle coming, and the potential for war, and how good Catholics should expect to kind of go into battle with progressives, and there may well be blood or whatever.
Oh, like a real war.
Yeah, like absolutely, like a real war.
Okay.
He very much kind of advocated for a kind of theocracy. I don't think I don't think he literally meant a theocracy, because a theocracy, I think, my understanding of it is that it's kind of literally you have priests in charge who kind of take messages from God, and kind of, I don't think they quite see that happening, but I think, and we're kind of starting to see this to a certain extent with Trump. It's about kind of having our guys in charge, people who we can trust, people who are like us, who believe the same kinds of things, who have a very similar kind of outlook on Western civilization, and what a family should look like, and what schooling should look like, and what society should look like.
Right.
It's more about that than an Illuminati of like a group of guys getting in a room together, and it's about kind of a culture. And Opus Dei is they have all of these plans in the US to expand. I mean, what they've very successfully inserted themselves into the Washington, D.C. kind of circles. I mean, one stat I kind of like to talk about is, as a Catholic organization, you'd expect the Opus Dei membership in the States to be kind of concentrated in predominantly Catholic cities.
Sure.
So like places like Boston, Chicago, New York, Miami these days, I guess, with the large Hispanic population. But the largest Opus Dei community in the States is Washington, D.C. And that's because that's where they focus their recruitment efforts, and because that's where you need to be to influence society. So having, I guess, kind of cracked the political judicial worlds, the next stage that they see is they really want to crack the education sphere. So they have these big plans to expand the Opus Dei school networks across the country. They're already present at all of the Ivy League universities, but they have these big plans to, again, expand their presence there to, I guess, influence the kinds of debates that are happening on campus, to try to kind of shift them to, I guess, kind of to insert more kind of conservative talking points. But also they're recruiting tomorrow's elite as well. They've already got today's elite. It's about grooming the next generation of leaders, to make sure they're also on the same page.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising, I suppose, that they're able to. I mean, I guess they're not really hidden because you know about it, but it seems like they don't maybe really advertise this particular thing. I mean, they're recruiting, but they're not necessarily advertising how much power that they're trying to exert over specific cultural moments.
Well, this
in the
is
courts,
because,
for example.
I mean, they very much like to keep kind of all of these things at arm's length, because it gives them kind of plausible deniability.
Sure, yeah.
But also what's interesting as well, what marks Opus Dei out from the rest of the church, is that for the rest of the Catholic Church, anybody's welcome to join. Like if you want to convert, you want to get baptized, if you do the right things, it's open to anyone basically. Whereas Opus Dei is by invitation only. You can't go onto the Opus Dei website, punch in your details, and get like a pamphlet in the post or brochure or whatever,
It's
and kind of
exclusive. It's a club.
they literally choose you as a member. They decide who they want. They decide whether that person's pliable, whether that person will be beneficial to the group, and then you're invited in. So it's absolutely by invitation only.
Are they true believers, all these people, you think, or is it kind of like a power structure like any other?
That's a great question. I think it depends how advanced Opus Dei is in that country. I think in many, like here in the UK, for example, Opus Dei is relatively small. And I think the people that join it here do it because they're really serious Catholics and they're looking for something, they're looking for like, Catholicism kind of pro or whatever,
Right, right.
And so, but I think Opus Dei in some parts of the world has so successfully inserted itself into society, particularly into kind of the political and business circles. So like in places like Spain, for example, and across Latin America, I think being part of Opus Dei and being part of the network can be extremely beneficial to you. Kind of, if you're starting a business,
Right.
you might get a few connections or a few deals through your pals in Opus Dei.
Sure.
It very much works like that in Spain.
Again, sort of like Scientology. I mean, I don't know that many other cults, so I'm constantly harping on this. But yeah, a lot of people, they join when they want to become an actor because it's like, oh, well, all the producers in this town are in there. Not all, but many. And the casting people are in here, and they're kind of going to pick you over other people if you join. And you're like, oh, it's kind of a club, and it's got the self-help element. And then after you're in it for a while, you're like, oh, aliens, huh? Or whatever the next few levels of this thing are. And it sort of sounds like that. Like, yeah, I'm Catholic. I'll go a little hardcore. Why not? It's kind of cool. I'm into it already. Look, I got promoted at the bank because one of the directors is Opus Dei, and I kind of came to him for some career advice. And look, I'm on the partner track now or whatever. And then it's like, ... You're in the club. You don't want to relinquish that for no good reason.
Totally. I mean, I see Opus Dei, in my mind, it's a kind of politicized club. It's kind of like a boys' club, although women are admitted as well. But with this kind of weird veil of spirituality, which does a couple of things. I mean, it kind of it means that people who are considering joining kind of drop their guard because they're like, oh, it's just part of the Catholic Church. It's kind of fine. But that spirituality element is also used to kind of, I guess, control people. It's also used, I think, especially in the world of politics, as a way of like, you've got a priest kind of patting you on the back saying, oh, yeah, your kind of ultra right-wing view on this, it's kind of justified in the Bible, so it's kind of fine. It's almost like a reassurance kind of thing.
I see.
So so it serves a bunch of purposes. But yeah, I mean, I'm under, like, no doubt, it's kind of a deeply reactionary political network that uses this kind of veil of spirituality, basically to entice people in and to keep them in.
Sure. It completely makes sense. It's a great strategy. I suppose it's really effective. So Dan Brown writes the DaVinci Code, and did this cause ruckus inside Opus Dei? Because no group wants their thing fictionalized to be like a massive hit and make them look crazy and psycho.
Well, you know what?
Right? Psycho levels of religion. Religion.
I remember during the kind of research for the book, I spent some time in New York, and I spoke to the guy there, the Opus Dei spokesperson, who was kind of discovered that whole thing. So he was, part of his job was to kind of read Publishers Weekly, which for those people who aren't into the publishing world is basically an industry magazine which tells you like the latest titles that are about to be launched or whatever. And he was kind of flicking through this, kind of on the lookout for anything that might be about Opus Dei, and he just comes across this crazy novel by this guy called Dan Brown, who'd had a couple of like minor hits before this, but he wasn't really well known at this stage. This is like 2003 or whatever. And he finds out that this book, basically, one of the main characters is an Opus Dei numeri, an albino monk. There are no monks.
The albino monk. I forgot about that. Yeah,
yes.
Right.
Who goes around kind of killing people to keep churches secret. And yeah. So obviously all of that kind of bit is like made up or whatever.
Right.
But I think at first they were like, oh, really? Like we're kind of going to be a kind of a group of that's ridiculed or whatever. But I think they very quickly realized that they could turn it to their advantage.
We're so famous, we got parodied by this hit novel. Look,
Totally.
Tom Hanks is in this movie about us.
And so they ran with it.
Yeah,
so they basically inserted themselves into the news cycle as like, hey, you've heard about the DaVinci Code. Now come meet the real Opus Dei.
Right.
Which is this kind of highly polished kind of public relations side of the organization. They don't tell you about the human trafficking or the drugging or the or the grooming of children. They kept that they kept that secret. But I mean, they told me that basically it was a turning point for them in the States. Suddenly they had a lot more members because people were like, they they very successfully inserted this highly polished image of Opus Dei into the media. And so, you know, you had pieces in like Time magazine, the New York Times, that were talking about the real Opus Dei, which was anything but.
I suppose they also would attract people who go, oh, I love a good, I'm cool being a little bit evil and justifying it with religion. So they probably get the contingent of those people as well, who are kind of like, I have no qualms abusing power. Where do I get some?
There is that. There is that. And actually, I get a lot of trolls on social media as a result of my work. And there are a lot of people that fall into that category of like, well, you know, I'm going to support these guys because they're the bad guys.
Right.
And because,
Why not?
Yeah.
I was going to ask if you feel like you maybe got a little bit of a target on your back exposing this, or have you faced any resistance or danger in exposing this? Because a lot of times these groups don't love it when investigative journalists go through their archives and find a bunch of dirt.
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of odd because the Opus Dei were kind of helpful, but kind of not helpful through the process.
Surprise. Yeah.
because you know, they were like, oh, we're totally transparent. We got nothing to hide. And I was like, great. Let's go with this.
Yeah.
Then.
Well,
like,
we're not that transparent.
So, you know, to their credit, you know, they arranged many interviews for me. They invited me into a bunch of their centers. But, you know, I didn't just take their word for it. I also did my homework, and I met, you know, I arranged my own interviews, met former members, did a huge amount of digging in the archives, whatever. And, but to answer your question about it's kind of been a weird experience. I mean, I fell into this story by accident. So I didn't set out to write something about Opus Dei. So I think they've kind of struggled a bit with that element, because it's kind of easy if someone comes and writes a book who has an agenda.
Right. Then you get the albino monk after you.
Well, yeah. Or someone who's for maybe like a disgruntled former member who writes a book. It's kind of easy to dismiss that. But because I'm coming at it from I fell into it by accident, that it's kind of hard for them to but they've tried. I mean, before the book came out, we had a few difficult months where Opus Dei hired an extremely expensive and extremely aggressive defamation firm.
Ooh,
and
especially in the UK, that's tough, right?
Well, actually, this was in the US.
Oh, it was? Because I know in the UK, defamation is so much easier to harass people with.
Yes, I think, but because the main publisher was American, Simon & Schuster,
I see, right.
They kind of, they came after us there, and they sent a lot of kind of aggressive letters, basically. I mean, I think the intention was to make Simon & Schuster think twice about publishing this.
But crap, he cashed his advance check, so we kind of have to
I think they were trying to send the message, maybe you've paid this guy in advance, but hey, there could be a lot more trouble on it. Why don't you just kind of quietly make this book go away? But to Simon & Schuster's credit, they stood by me the whole way.
Yeah, that's impressive.
It's really impressive. And, I thank them, and hats off to them. But that wasn't the end of the kind of campaign. Before the book even came out, before they'd even had a chance to read a page of the book, they issued all of these statements saying it was all conspiracy theories, it's all lies. I mean, how can you say something is lies if you don't even know what's written written in there? It's
that's true.
And then
we're going to assume it's all lies, yeah.
And once the book came out, they launched this whole kind of disinformation campaign. They tried to do this whole character assassination. I've had all this kind of army of trolls online trying to kind of take me down. And
I'm
also
waiting for the emails that say oh, he took you for a ride. Everything he said was false.
Yeah.
You got to have this other guy on and hear the truth. I get that every time I do something like this. Here's another guy. He'll show you the truth. And you look the guy up and it's going to be a guy who's a lifelong priest from the Spanish church, lives in Texas now. It's going to be somebody like that.
Yeah.
A spokesperson who's not publicly a spokesperson for
Totally.
Opus Dei.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's been interesting. But I mean, the most interesting thing for me is that most normal organizations, when confronted with super serious allegations of human trafficking, grooming of kids, drugging your own members, spiritual abuse, kind of breaking the seal of confession, they would come out and they would say, these are really serious allegations. We are going to take them very seriously.
Yeah.
We're going to investigate them, get to the bottom of them. And if anyone needs to be brought to justice, we'll ensure that's done. Opus Dei's response has been stick its fingers in its ears and go, la, 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 la. This guy's a liar. This guy's a liar. And I think that's really quite telling. I mean, this is an organization that has zero intentions of addressing its failures and addressing abuse inside of its ranks. Because, I mean, it's kind of backed itself into a corner. Because the founder said the vision for Opus Dei came from God, and because the founder wrote this vision down kind of in meticulous amounts of detail, to challenge anything that the founder wrote down is to challenge the whole foundation that this group is built upon. It's to challenge this notion that it's an idea from God. And so they're kind of trapped. They can't question anything about the way it runs because that's kind of what the founder said. And the founder said it came from God. So how can we challenge God? So they've kind of got themselves into this kind of vicious circle, I think.
Were there any, it's going to be hard to pinpoint just one thing, but were there any specific moments during your investigation that really shocked or deeply disturbed you? I mean, again, it's going to be hard to pick one with the labor trafficking and all this stuff, but anything stand out?
I mean, I went out to Argentina to meet, there's a group of 42 women there who were recruited as kids and basically enslaved by Opus Dei. And, meeting with many of those women, hearing their stories was just absolutely horrendous. I mean, I've got girls who I've got 3 daughters. 2 of them are kind of that age where these girls, and it's just to think of these poor kids being enticed with this kind of carrot of a better life and then ending up being kind of led into this horrendous life of servitude. I mean, they were literally working 14 hours a day for no pay, 365 days a year. They were not allowed to go out onto the street on their own unaccompanied. I mean, it's like The Handmaid's Tale.
It really sounds
but
like it,
in real life. And one of the most uncomfortable moments was, Opus Dei said it didn't have anything to hide. And so I said, well, look, I'd love to come into one of these schools that still exists in Argentina these days. And I said, look, here's a school I found. I know it was directly financed by the banks. There's a direct link to what I'm investigating. Can I? And they're like, but it's all fine. All the girls are happy there. I was like, well, fine. Let me come in and let me talk to some of them. And this went on for days. So and I'm like, look, I'm leaving tomorrow.
Right.
If I don't speak to them tomorrow, then that's it. And well, we'll try. And then I get a call in a few hours before I'm leaving saying, I'm afraid they've had a vote inside the school and the girls have voted that they don't want to speak to you.
These people who are enslaved and aren't allowed to go out on their own have voted to not allow anyone to come
voted,
to talk to them.
They said they don't want you they don't want you in because they might be uncomfortable having a guy around and a journalist. But they've nominated two people to come and be kind of spokespeople for the group. Mm-hmm. And they'll meet you in they'll meet you at the Opus Dei office or whatever. So I was like, okay, well, it's not ideal because I kind of, but fine. And so I went off and had coffee with these 2 young women. And I was like, yeah, so I heard that you guys had a vote. And they were like, what? What are you talking about? And so I'm like, it's just so many moments like that.
Didn't even get the lie straight. Forgot to brief them on the bullshit that they gave you on the phone call. Oh my gosh.
So many moments like that where, they feed you what sounds like a plausible excuse or explanation or lie. And then you dig into it and you find out it's just all horseshit.
But it's not even well orchestrated horseshit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Hey, when you go there, he's going to ask about the vote. We told him we all voted and that you're the spokespeople. They just show up totally unprepared. It's comically ridiculous.
I had another thing where, basically I was asking about what had happened at the Vatican with Pope Francis and this kind of clampdown. And, this one senior guy in Opus Dei was telling me how it was all nonsense. What really happened was this. And then the more I dug into the story and the more I asked him well, how can you say that? How do you know this? And it became apparent that he was just making the whole thing up.
Yeah, sure.
And so but I think the reason they've got away with it for so long is because it's complicated. There are, journalists don't have a huge amount of time. They're under pressure to kind of get the next story.
Generally, yeah.
And so it's been, I think, quite easy for them over the years to kind of brush people off with kind of these explanations about whatever. And I only fell into this by accident. So, if the bank hadn't collapsed, then much of this story might have remained untold.
I think so. What's this about hiring retired FBI agents to investigate people? Do you want to comment on that?
Yes. A lot of people inside Opus Dei have been unhappy about Pope Francis and the kind of, I guess, the way that he was running in Opus Dei, but also the way he was pushing the church in a slightly more progressive direction. And so they had this campaign going, kind of thinking, well, this papacy's kind of lost, but we can try to make sure the next guy is one of us. And so they started this campaign, and they hired a bunch of former FBI agents, former CIA agents to collect dirt on potential candidates for the next pope, with the idea that, and they did this in the end. So when ahead of the conclave that has just happened, they published this website and published this book with all of this kind of dossier inside on each of the potential candidates. The idea being that they were going to kind of
Smear a few of them.
Wow. And try to get one of their guys elected, but it failed.
It failed. Wow. I'm sure that why it failed is probably a whole separate book, but it's interesting because you would think that if there's a actual real life conspiracy going on inside the church with all these levers of power, they probably had a pretty good chance of getting their own guy in, and there's other people who were not interested in that.
Yeah, I mean, the conclave is literally like 130 guys who get to vote in secret.
Right.
And so I guess kind of trying to push that election one way or another. No one will ever know how many votes Pope Leo got or whatever.
Yeah, it could have been close.
It could, yeah, I mean, there was every chance they might get their guy in. And, leaking the right information, he's not linked to Opus Dei as far as I know, but this Donald Trump's the nominated ambassador to the Vatican, this guy called Brian Birch, he's linked to a website that put out this crazy piece of this crazy story about one of the leading candidates for Pope just hours before the conclave, about how this guy had collapsed and all these ambulances had to be brought. I mean, clearly, and they pulled the story in the end. But it was part of this wider campaign to smear the liberal progressive candidates with the hope of getting a more conservative Pope.
So what do you think Opus Dei's goals are now? I mean, back in the day, it was re-Christianize the whole world. Do you think they're maybe shifting it up a little bit, or are they still kind of like, now we want the whole world to be re-Christianized?
I think Opus Dei right now is purely focused on survival. I think it's pretty clear that Francis wanted to bring them down, or to push them to massively clean up. It looks like Leo wants to go the same way. So I think right now it's about trying to save as much of it as they can. I'm sure there are a bunch of diehards inside Opus Dei that are like, whatever the Pope does, a bunch of us will carry on. This is an organization that has hundreds of kind of shell companies around the world. They have assets in the billions. In the US alone, I totted up something like 100 nonprofits that are linked to Opus Dei.
Really? So this is almost like a parallel Vatican in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, after Pope Francis began to clamp down, they started to sell off some of the properties. They had this Tiffany mansion in Boston. They had this 16th century castle on the banks of Lake Como in Italy. And they start selling this stuff off.
Why?
I think it's to have liquidity and to have money in the right places, just in case Opus Dei is closed down. Because these non-profits officially have nothing to do with Opus Dei. So even if Opus Dei is closed down, they'll continue to kind of exist. And, I think it's a way of restarting the project, in another name.
I see.
So I think, I do think there's still this kind of diehard core who, no matter what happens with the Vatican, even if the Vatican closes it down, they'll still seek to kind of further the agenda. They'll seek to carry out God's work and the teachings of the founder, Jose Maria Escrivá, no matter what.
I am so curious what my Christian and especially my Catholic listeners think of this. I'm sure that somebody who's listening to this is in Opus Dei and is going to be like, this guy's got it all wrong. Because whenever I talk about Scientology, I get emails from people who are in Scientology. I don't know how high ranking they are, but they're like, you got it wrong. It's like a self-help thing, blah, blah, blah. But then you talk to, I don't know, Leah Remini or somebody who's high up in Scientology, and they're like, no, it's crazy.
I mean, I think this is a good moment actually to say that I think the vast majority of Opus Dei members are probably good people
Yeah, they're just really hardcore Catholics.
who don't have a
Right.
clue what's going on. Like, they don't have a clue about this human trafficking and the way that, certain members are being drugged and all of these abuses going on. I think they would be absolutely horrified to find out what is going on inside the organization. And so, I mean, obviously, I want them to read my book. Go read my book. You'd have to buy it. Go and get it from the library if you don't
Right,
want
I
to.
was gonna say,
like it's a
buy it, but maybe hide it under your couch
well,
cushions.
yes, or like. I'm on Twitter, and if you want to DM me, I'm happy to enter into conversation or whatever. But I haven't made this stuff up. There are several other places you can go. I mean, in the 90s in the US, there was a website set up by former members called the Opus Dei Awareness Network. It's kind of fallen into disuse. There's a Spanish language kind of community called Opus Libros. On Reddit, there's an Opus Dei community these days, an Opus Dei exposed community. There are lots of former members out there. So, if you are a member of Opus Dei or you kind of don't believe me for what, you think this guy's got skin in the game, he just wants to sell his book, go speak to these other people and find out what's really going on. There's an excellent documentary on HBO Max, which came out recently called How I Left Opus Dei, which is I think it's 13 women, former members of Opus Dei. Some of them are these numeri servants from all over the world. It's not just Argentina or Spain or whatever. They're from all over the world who talk about their experience. So, go out there. It's not just me saying this. This is a widespread problem.
Yeah, it's so interesting. In your opinion, what is the best way for the public at large to remain vigilant against these kinds of sort of hidden influences or groups? Or is it just more like be aware that if you're joining a hardcore religious cult or religious organization that maybe there's a shady side to it? I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, my advice with Opus Dei would be to steer clear. You can't stay far enough away from this organization because once it gets its clutches into you, it will really rip you apart and take advantage of you completely. I mean, my opinions on, I'm not religious myself, but I mean, my opinions on Catholicism and religion more generally are fine. If that's, if that rocks your boat, it does something for you, religion can be a very positive thing, fine. But Opus Dei is not a positive thing, and in my opinion, should be completely eradicated.
What do you think can be done to safeguard institutions like, for example, the Supreme Court or just the judicial branch in general? What can we do to safeguard them from external manipulation by groups like Opus Dei?
I mean, I don't know, and I kind of hesitate as a non-American giving you guys advice about what to do.
I think that maybe you should rethink that position. I think we could use a little external expertise.
We tried to give you our advice 200 years ago or whatever.
Yeah, we weren't good. We didn't take that, did we? Didn't take that well.
But I mean, honestly, it's kind of odd for me as a Brit looking at the way the judiciary works in the US. Over here, the judiciary is kind of being a judge is like being a doctor. It's not a politicized position. You don't get kind of Democrat doctors and Republican doctors, so why should you have that in the judiciary? It just kind of seems very odd.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Certainly here, so judges are appointed by, judges appoint each other, and it's kind of seen as a professional guild almost. It's they're not political appointees. There are no elections or whatever. And when I look across the pond and see how things are done there and how it's so politicized and how your stance on certain issues can mean the difference between you getting a position on the bench or not, I just find that I find it extraordinary. And
extraordinary is a good word for it, sure.
So, especially since the judiciary is meant to be kind of the third pillar.
Yeah, that's the point. Yeah.
And it's not meant to be part of, you have the executive and you have the
legislative.
The legislative, and this is meant to be a different thing that's kind of removed from those other two legs of government. But clearly it's not, because you have people who are, the Republican president is appointing Republican judges who are approved by Republican Senate, and it just seems very strange. I don't know. And look, and the UK judiciary is not perfect either.
Sure.
But yeah,
what's with the wigs? That's my question.
Well, you know what? As a guy with
You could use one. Yeah, sure.
I could use a wig. Yeah, maybe I'm in the wrong job.
That's right. That's right. Go to law school and you can pick up a wig. Gareth, thank you so much, man. Really interesting. We'll link to the book, of course, in the show notes. I appreciate you coming on. Glad we were finally able to do it.
Thanks, Jordan, for having me on. Been a pleasure.